Marxist Socialism and Scientific Socialism by Ian Quadrini, Anna Fedorov, Ewan Keenan, and Becky Senator.
So the context is that the Industrial Revolution drove the lower class, poorer people into the cities for work. And these cities were really crowded and they were subjected to the harsh working conditions inside of the factories. And over time, there began to be a belief that capitalism created greed, and that the greed combined with individualism created social inequality. And this prompted the socialist way of thinking, in which socialist principles were thought to be a solution to the social inequality created by capitalism. And so socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. So that community is like all the people of the society. And a good way to think about it is it's kind of like the opposite of like the liberalist ideas.
The working class or the poor supported this idea because they did most of the draining physical labor that the economy profited from. Working conditions were intolerable and dangerous, and factory workers were not making enough money despite their day-long work hours. In addition, with the current capitalist society, as more money was made, the more expensive food and housing got. As a result, the working class would face even more challenges with taking care of their large families. Marxist and scientific socialism aids with this, as they would have more money instead of only the rich making the profits from their blood, sweat, and tears. The wealthy were the ones profiting from the capitalist society, as they had the money to buy everything factories produced. In addition, they had the money available to distribute the products they bought, which would further increase their wealth. Therefore, the upper class were the ones who would not support these political and economic ideologies, as they would lose the high ground where they held the power and influence in society.
Scientific Socialism. Scientific socialism is a method of understanding and predicting social, economic, and material conditions and problems by looking at things through a scientific and reasonable viewpoint and solving these economic problems. Scientific socialism derives itself from reality and reality's problems itself. Scientific socialism was a result of the Industrial Revolution. A large part of the Industrial Revolution was the uprising of factories, and although factories were great because they helped people find jobs in these large urban areas, factories made employment rates skyrocket, and because of this, there were so many people working in these factories, including a large number of children, which sprang up bad and dangerous working conditions. These poor working conditions were examined through scientific socialism. This form of socialism helped put an end to these substandard conditions of life by improving the working class's conditions and spreading awareness to help this cause. This scientific socialism focused on the details of the matters and looked at the reality of the problems rather than pretending it was okay when it simply was not, and ultimately helped these problems.
Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were the authors of the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. However, Karl Marx was the more influential of the two. He developed the labor theory of value. His theory stated that the value of a produced economic good should be measured objectively by the average number of hours of labor required to produce it. Basically, if a table took 2 men to make, the work of both men should be equal to the price. He wrote about how capitalism planted the seeds of its own destruction and laid the foundations for future communist leaders such as Vladimir and Joseph Stalin. Marx only viewed society from the eyes of a laborer, and it sometimes prevented him from seeing the flaws in his own logic. Despite that fact, his theory is now commonly rejected as an economic practice. He still has a large impact in the fields of sociology, political economy, and the strands of heterodox economics.
Our first buzzword is inequality, and inequality is really important because it's why socialism occurs in the 19th century. Just to reiterate, the different classes created by capitalist societies that are separated by by different incomes is what starts the socialist movement. The inequality between the wealthy and the poor people, or the upper and the lower classes, like you see in the pyramid image on the right, is where the socialist ideas are applied. It's the problem that socialist thinkers are trying to solve.
The policies of scientific and Marxist socialism would bring immense change, as it would completely restructure society in the 1800s. There would now be shared wealth, equal representation, and lesser hardships for the poor working class, the complete opposite of the capitalistic society it currently is. People want change, and in short, change is captivating, not capitalism.
The buzzword radical will help you remember our terms because it is the base of these ideals. As touched on in previous slides, these movements focus on the betterment of life. The radical way of thinking helped drive Marxist and scientific socialism because it helped solve problems from their roots.